Good afternoon from the Gothenburg Learning Center. You can see the weather's nice, and we're actually having to do something a little bit different this year. We're doing a little bit of irrigation in November, and we're kind of out here scouting the wheat, taking a look at some of it. And I've got Brian Olson, Learning Center Manager here, and he's going to visit with us about what we're seeing in the field.
Yeah, so obviously we've got pretty dry conditions as we move further west, and it's led to a lot of variability. You can see that out here in this wheat field. We've got some wheat that emerged a couple weeks ago, while other plants are just emerging now. So this was planted about 3 weeks ago into some soybeans stubble, and so pretty dry conditions, right? And so there was enough moisture to get part of it, part of that wheat germinated and emerged, but then the rest of the wheat was just sitting out there. And so we've come back here in the last week to go ahead and put on some additional moisture. And so when we're looking at that wheat plant, I went through and dug a couple plants here. And so the wheat plant's got this coleoptile, which is basically a straw that first leaf comes up through. And what happens sometimes is we can get this coleoptile to become dehydrated. And once it becomes dehydrated in very dry conditions, it shortens up that coleoptile length. And so literally you can have a wheat variety that would have emerged, let's say you put it in at 1.5 inches, 2 inches into the soil, but there was just enough moisture out there to get it started, but not completely emerged out of the soil profile. And so then it shortens up this coleoptile, and then when it does get some subsequent moisture, if it's still alive, that coleoptile length is going to be a lot shorter, and so it may not completely emerge out of the soil and cause some significant problems, and you can see some highly variable stands out there. Also, in dry conditions, you can get crusting, and so here we've got the first true leaf that obviously shot out up underneath the ground, and if it was unable to get to the surface and start getting some sunlight, that plant would also die out there in the field. So we can see some, again, variable conditions with emergence out there in the field. And so really when we're looking at these conditions, we can see it obviously in fields that we planted to wheat on fallow ground because conditions were so dry out west, but we also see it with high prevalence when we're trying to plant after a crop, let's say like soybeans or corn or grain sorghum, that really dried out that profile. So when we've got that emergence, we got to think about when that wheat is actually coming up. Is it coming up in that 2 weeks after we planted, or did it come up 8, 10, 12 weeks afterwards? And if it's coming up 8 to 12 weeks after we planted it, that's the time we really got to look at for yield potential, right? When it actually emerges. And so if it doesn't emerge until January, we're going to see probably about a 40 to 60% reduction in yield depending upon our expectations. For example, if it was a wheat stand that we would have put in that end of September into October time frame, we probably see about 60% reduction in potential. If it was something that we would have put in November, let's say after we would have been taking our soybeans or grain sorghum or corn off, maybe we're seeing maybe a 40% reduction in yield potential. But regardless, this is some challenging times for wheat. Fortunately, if you've got some irrigation, you can go out there and irrigate that up on some of those fields. But dry land, hopefully we're going to get some moisture this weekend that will help get these stands established. But again, just keep your eye on it. You can go out there in January and February with a higher seeding rate, 120 to 150 pounds of wheat to kind of to fill in those areas where you, let's say a side hill where you just don't get that emergence that you anticipated. You can go out there and fill that in. But keep an eye on those wheat fields for sure as we move through these next couple months.
I guess I was going to ask, are there any concerns about vernalization just right now?
Yep, and so as long as that wheat seed imbibes water, it doesn't have to fully emerge, but it does have to imbibe water. Once it imbibes water, that's when vernalization can occur. Obviously, for all the farmers out there, they want to see the wheat up and going. But again, that's where you can put that wheat in January to fill in some spots out there in the field and you may not actually see that come up until the end of February into March. And it's always the question, well, did it get enough time out there in the cold weather to actually vernalize? And the answer is yes, because again, as long as there's moisture out there, that wheat kernel imbibes water, it gets the vernalization process started.
Well, thanks, Brian. Yeah, it is definitely one of those times out here where we're going to be watching that wheat crop, making sure that it's moving along, and we'll probably come back and be checking it here periodically just to make sure it's moving. But we look forward to coming back and sharing some more information from the Learning Center. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, it's one of those things that we got to stay on top of for sure.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching this video from the Gothenburg Water Utilization Learning Center. For more information, please call 308-537-4500.